My family evicted me from the apartment. I paid for 8 years to give it free to my brother who lost $15,000. Now they're begging because they lost their house. But they discovered without me they couldn't survive, and I left them with nothing. I'm 26 years old. I'm a project manager at a tech company. And I need to get this story off my chest because I've been carrying it around for months, and it basically destroyed my relationship with my entire family. The thing is, for years, literal years, I was the responsible son. You know, the one who always did everything right, the one who never caused problems, and I still ended up being the villain of the story. I guess I should start from the beginning, so you can understand how we got to this absurdly messed up point. For as long as I can remember, my younger brother Caleb was always my parents' favorite. It's not that I'm paranoid or anything. It was obvious to anyone who saw it. Caleb is 24 now, 2 years younger than me, and he was always the golden child, the one who could do whatever he wanted without consequences. I was the one who had to set an example, be mature, help with everything. When Caleb failed math in high school, my parents hired him a tutor and bought him a new computer to motivate him. When I got straight A's that same year, they told me they were proud, but that it was what was expected of me. You get the difference? It was like my achievements didn't count because they were obvious, but any minimal thing Caleb did was worthy of celebration. At 18, I moved into my parents' basement. They had converted it into a kind of apartment, like with its own bathroom, a small kitchen, independent entrance. Honestly, it was pretty decent. I paid rent, not much, but something, like $400 a month, which at the time seemed reasonable to me because it included utility. And I also helped with household expenses, bought groceries, paid for repairs when something broke. My parents aren't millionaires or anything. My dad worked at a factory, and my mom was a secretary at a school. So my help was welcome, I guess. Caleb, meanwhile, spent his time jumping from one business idea to another. First, he wanted to be a fitness influencer. Lasted like 3 months before he got bored. Then he tried selling supplements online, some kind of MLM that obviously didn't work. Then he wanted to be a chef, and my parents paid for an expensive cooking course that he never finished. Every time one of his projects failed, my parents consoled him and told him that the next opportunity would come, not to worry. They never pressured him to get a stable job, never demanded that he contribute financially. And there I was, working full-time since I was 19, helping pay the household bills while Caleb pursued his dreams with everyone's money. When Caleb was like 21, he met Stephanie, his now wife. Stephanie is one of those people who live on Instagram. You know, always posting photos with new outfits, at expensive restaurants, trips every 2 months. I have nothing against people who live like that if they can afford it, but she and Caleb clearly couldn't. They got married super fast, like within a year of knowing each other, and my parents paid for the entire wedding. A wedding with 150 guests with a DJ. Banquet, huge cake, the whole show. When I mentioned that maybe it was too much expense, my mom told me it was a special occasion and not to be a killjoy. She literally called me a killjoy for worrying about the family's finances. Caleb and Stephanie moved into a small apartment that my parents helped them pay for during the first months. Then they had Logan, their first son, and 2 years later, Harper came along. I tried to be the cool uncle. Honestly, I bought gifts for the kids, went to visit them when I could, but there was always this weird tension where I felt like I never did enough. My mom would always tell me things like, "Caleb is struggling a lot with expenses, maybe you could help him a little," or, "It would be nice if you bought diapers for the kids. They're so expensive." And I would help, obviously because they're my nephews and I didn't want them to lack anything, but it was frustrating to see that Caleb kept buying unnecessary things, while I was subsidizing his basic expenses. Last year, Caleb had his big idea. He was going to open an electronics repair shop. According to him, he had taken online courses, free, obviously, and had a friend who was going to teach him everything he needed to know. My parents lent him like $15,000 to start the business, money they took out of their retirement savings. I told them it seemed very risky, that Caleb had no real experience in that, but my dad told me I was very negative and didn't support my brother. I remember that conversation perfectly because it hurt me so much. Like, I had been supporting that family financially for years and they were calling me negative for being realistic. The shop opened in March last year. The first 2 months, Caleb was super excited, posted everything on social media, did promotions. It seemed to be going well. But by June, he was already struggling. He didn't have enough customers. The rent for the location was higher than he had calculated. And it turns out that repairing electronics requires more knowledge than some YouTube videos can give you. By August, Stephanie was pregnant again, unplanned, according to them, and things got worse. By October, Caleb had to close the shop. He lost all the money my parents had lent him, plus the credit card debts he had accumulated buying inventory and equipment. That's when everything went to hell, basically. It was like November. I remember perfectly because I was working on a huge project at the office. Super stressed, getting home at 9 or 10 at night every day. One night, I got home, and my parents told me they needed to talk to me. My mom had that face she makes when she's going to say something she knows I won't like, and my dad was serious, arms crossed. I sat down at the kitchen table and my mom said, "Caleb and Stephanie lost their apartment because they can't pay rent. They're going to have to move here for a while." I said, "Okay, I understand. It's a difficult situation. Family is family." I thought they were going to stay in the guest room or something. But then my mom kept talking and said, "They're going to need the basement because there are 4 of them and they need more space, so you're going to move to the hobby room." The hobby room. A room that's basically a glorified closet where my mom keeps her sewing machine, boxes of Christmas decorations, and a bunch of junk they've accumulated over the years. A room that's like 3 meters by 3 meters, no private bathroom, no kitchen, barely enough space for a twin bed and maybe a nightstand. I was in shock. I literally couldn't process what they were telling me. I told them, "Wait, I live here. I pay rent. I've been paying rent for 8 years, and you're just going to kick me out of my apartment to give it to Caleb." My dad told me to stop being selfish, that Caleb had kids and needed the space more than me, that I was single and didn't need that much room. I explained to them that I work from home 3 days a week, that I need space for my office, privacy for my work calls, that the hobby room doesn't even have good Wi-Fi signal because it's on the other side of the house. My mom told me I was exaggerating, that it was only temporary, that in a few months, Caleb and Stephanie would get back on their feet and leave. I tried to negotiate, to look for alternatives. I suggested that Caleb and Stephanie stay in the guest room while they looked for another place, that I would help them pay for a small apartment for a few months. But no. My parents had already decided. It was the basement or nothing. And the worst part is, they acted like I was ungrateful for questioning the decision. My mom said, "After everything we've done for you, can't you make this small sacrifice for your brother?" And I was thinking, small sacrifice? You're kicking me out of my home, my space, the place where I've lived for 8 years and that I've put money into and even improved with my own resources. But anyway, what was I going to do? I didn't have a formal lease because they were my parents. Everything had been verbal. And I also didn't have the money saved to go somewhere else immediately because, ironically, I had spent so much helping my family that my savings were minimal. So I agreed. With a knot in my stomach and a resentment that was starting to grow, I agreed to move to the damn hobby room. Moving day was horrible. I had to pack my entire life into boxes and watch Caleb and Stephanie arrive with their things, excited to have so much new space. Stephanie even thanked me, like, "Thanks, Luke, for being so understanding. This means a lot to us." And I just nodded because I didn't trust what might come out of my mouth. Logan and Harper were running around everywhere, excited to have their own room each, because yes, they were going to have 2 rooms in my former apartment, while I was stuffing my things into a space that barely fit my bed and desk. The first few weeks were hell. The hobby room shared a wall with Logan's room, who apparently didn't understand the concept of sleeping. He cried every night, screamed, played. I had to get up at 6 inches the morning for work, and I barely slept 4 or 5 hours. The bathroom I had to use now was the one in the hallway, which Caleb, Stephanie, and the kids also used when the basement bathroom was occupied. There were toys all over the house. The kitchen was always dirty. The food I bought disappeared. My mom said that kids sometimes took things without permission and not to make a big deal, that they were just kids. My workspace was a nightmare. I couldn't have professional video calls without the kids screaming in the background. One day, I was in an important meeting with a client, and Harper came into the room, crying because she wanted me to help her find her doll. I had to apologize and pause the camera while I took her to my mom. It was super embarrassing. I tried to put a lock on the door, but my mom got angry and said that in her house there were no doors with locks, that it was dangerous if there was an emergency. I mean, the irony that the basement had a door with a lock, but I couldn't have one. One day, like a month and a half into this whole circus, I went down to the basement to look for some tools I had left there. Caleb was watching TV on my old couch, which I had bought, and there were Amazon boxes everywhere. I asked him what he had bought, and he said casually, "Oh, some Christmas gifts for Stephanie and the kids." I opened one of the boxes because I was curious, and it was a designer purse, like one of those that costs like $800. I was staring at the purse and then at Caleb, and I asked him, "I thought you guys were struggling financially. I thought you needed help with baby formula and diapers," and Caleb told me that wasn't my problem, that he knew how to manage his money. I lost my head, honestly. I told him how was it possible that he was buying luxury purses when I had to give up my space so he would have somewhere to live, when my parents had gone into debt to help him with his failed business, when the whole family was making sacrifices except him. Caleb stood up and told me I was jealous of his success, that I had always been like that I couldn't stand to see him happy. Success? What success? The guy had just bankrupted his business and was living for free at our parents' house. Stephanie came out of the room and got involved in the argument, telling me to stop harassing her husband, that if I had any problem I should talk to my parents. Which was ridiculous, because my parents were part of the problem. That night, I tried to talk to my parents about the situation. I explained to them that the conditions I was living in were unsustainable, that I couldn't work well, that I had no privacy, that I was exhausted. My dad told me to stop complaining, that when he was my age he lived in much worse conditions and never complained. My mom added that Caleb was going through a difficult time and that I should be more empathetic, that he had 2 kids and another on the way, that I only had myself. I reminded them that I had also had difficult times and never received this level of support, that I had worked hard to be independent from a young age, precisely so as not to be a burden. My mom told me that was my decision, that nobody had asked me to be the perfect son. That phrase destroyed me. Honestly, nobody had asked me to be the perfect son. As if all these years of being responsible, of helping financially, of putting the family's needs above mine, had been my personal whim and not something they had expected and constantly reinforced. I went to my room and cried for the first time in years. Not from sadness, but from rage, from accumulated frustration, from realizing that I was never going to be enough for them, that I was always going to be less important than Caleb. Things kept getting worse. One day I was working from home on an important call with my boss and the team. When Caleb started drilling something in the basement, the noise was deafening. I ran upstairs to ask him to stop, explained that I was in a crucial work meeting, and he told me he couldn't stop his project just because I was busy. I called my mom, who was in the kitchen, and asked her to please say something to him, and she told me that Caleb was installing some shelves for the kids and that it was important that I could do my call later. I went back to my room, apologized to my boss, and had to end the meeting early. My boss asked me if everything was okay at home, and I told him yes, just some temporary problems. But honestly, it wasn't okay. Nothing was okay. That night, I took my laptop, packed some clothes, and left. I just left. I searched Google for nearby hotels and found one of those short-stay resorts, like suites with kitchen included, and checked in for a week. I needed to get out of there. I needed to think, sleep, work, in peace. I didn't tell anyone where I was. Just sent a message saying I was going to be away for a few days. My mom called me like 20 times. I answered once just to tell her I was fine, that I just needed space. She got hysterical, saying, "How could I abandon my family like that? What would people think?" I hung up on her. During that week, I worked without interruptions, slept 8 hours every night, ate when I wanted, had silence. It was the first time in months that I felt like a person again. And there, in that anonymous hotel room, I realized I couldn't go back. Not like that. Not to that situation. I started looking for apartments. I found one like 30 minutes from the office, A small studio, but completely mine, for $950 a month. It was more expensive than what I paid at my parents' house, but it included everything, and, more importantly, it was my space. I talked to the owner, passed the credit check, and signed the contract. The floor moved under me when I signed that paper. Like, this is real. I'm really becoming independent, cutting the umbilical cord once and for all. When I told my parents, chaos broke out. My mom cried. My dad yelled at me. Caleb called me selfish and a traitor. But what surprised me most was when my mom told me that even if I left, she expected me to continue paying my share of rent and household expenses. She literally told me, "We made an agreement. You pay $400 a month plus food. That doesn't change just because you decided to leave." I asked her if she was serious, if she really expected me to pay for a room where I no longer lived while also paying for my new apartment, and she said, yes, that family helps each other, that they had made sacrifices to have Caleb and his family there, and I should too. That was the last straw. I told her no, that I definitely wasn't going to pay double rent to subsidize Caleb, that if they needed the money, Caleb could get a real job instead of looking for the next big business. My dad got into the conversation and told me I was a bad son, that I was abandoning my family when they needed me most, that I was selfish and only thought about myself. Caleb, who was obviously listening from the basement, came upstairs and started yelling at me that because of me, his kids weren't going to have a stable roof, that I had a well-paid job and could help, but chose not to. I told them that for 8 years I had helped, that I had paid for things that weren't my responsibility, that I had constantly sacrificed my own needs and goals, and that no more, that if Caleb needed money, he should sell the designer purse he had just bought for his wife. Stephanie, who had also come upstairs at some point, was very offended and said that was a gift and how dare I interfere in their relationship. The irony of all this is incredible, right? They could interfere in my life, dictate where I lived, use my things, interrupt my work, expect my money, but I couldn't have an opinion about their disastrous financial decisions. I left that night and didn't come back. My mom kept calling me, sending me guilt messages, saying I was killing her with stress, that because of me she was going to get sick. My dad sent me a single message saying, "I don't know how you became such a selfish person. Your brother needs you, and you turn your back on him. May God forgive you, because I can't." I blocked him. I blocked my parents. Something I never thought I would do, but that felt necessary and, strangely, liberating. Like a week after I moved, my parents organized a family meeting. I found out because my Aunt Paula called me saying we needed to talk, that the family was worried about the situation. I went, against my better judgment, thinking that maybe we could have a calm and rational conversation. Wrong. I arrived at the house and everyone was there. My parents, Caleb and Stephanie, my Aunt Paula, my Uncle Ricardo, 2 cousins, my grandmother. They basically ambushed me. My mom opened in the meeting by saying she had invited me so I could explain why I had decided to abandon the family. I tried to explain my perspective, to talk about the years of financial contribution, about the unfair conditions, about the obvious favoritism toward Caleb. But every time I tried to speak, someone interrupted me. My Aunt Paula said that family is forever, and that I was being immature. My Uncle Ricardo said that when he was my age, he had to make much greater sacrifices and never complained. My grandmother, who was usually neutral in these conflicts, told me I was disappointing her, that she had raised my mom to be a good mother, and that I didn't appreciate that. Caleb gave a whole speech about how I had always been resentful of him, how since we were kids I had been competitive and jealous, how now that he needed help, I was showing my true colors. Stephanie added that her kids were asking why Uncle Luke didn't visit them anymore, that I was causing them emotional damage with my absence. My cousin Daniel, who barely knows me because he lives in another state, said he had heard I had anger issues and that maybe I should seek therapy. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone was pointing at me as the problem. I told them that if they really wanted to help Caleb, they should help him get a stable job, stop enabling him financially, teach him responsibility. My dad told me that's enough, that he wasn't going to allow me to insult my brother in his house. I told him that technically it was my former apartment that they had unfairly kicked me out of. My mom started crying, saying I was cruel, that I was breaking her heart. Caleb stood up and told me to leave, that clearly I didn't want to be part of the family, that they didn't need me. I stood up, looked at all of them, and said, "You're right, I don't want to be part of this. Not of this toxic dynamic, where everything I do is never enough, but Caleb can do whatever he wants, without consequences. I'm leaving, and this time, for good." And I left. I literally left the house in the middle of the most uncomfortable silence I've ever experienced. I heard my mom crying as I closed the door, and honestly, it hurt, but I also felt free in some strange way. I thought that would be the end. But no, because my mom decided to escalate things. A few days later, I got a call from my boss. He told me that my mom had called the office, saying I was going through a severe emotional crisis and needed medical leave. I had to explain to my boss that no, I wasn't in crisis, that it was a family problem, but I was handling it. It was super embarrassing, like my own mother trying to sabotage my job because I wasn't doing what she wanted. My boss was understanding, thank God, but told me that if I needed to talk to human resources about the situation, he would support me. Then Caleb started with the social media posts. Nothing direct, all super passive-aggressive. He posted something like, "It's sad when people who are supposed to love you turn their backs on you in your darkest moments, thanks to those who are here for my family." And then another one that said, "I will teach my children the true meaning of family and loyalty, something some people will never learn." All the comments were from my relatives supporting him, saying things like, "You're a strong man, Caleb. Your brother doesn't know what he lost." It was like a smear campaign against me. I called him, furious, and told him to stop posting indirect messages about me, that if he had something to say to tell me directly. He played dumb, saying his posts had nothing to do with me, that I was paranoid. I told him we both knew exactly what he was talking about and to stop. He told me the truth hurts, that I had become a bitter and toxic person, and that he was just protecting his family from my negative influence. I hung up on him and blocked him too. But Caleb didn't give up there. One afternoon, like 2 weeks later, he showed up at my new apartment. I don't know how he got the address. I guess my mom had it from my emergency contact info or something. He knocked on the door, and when I opened it, he was there, looking angry. He told me we needed to talk, that I couldn't keep avoiding the family. I told him he wasn't welcome in my home, and to leave. He came in anyway, pushing past me, and started walking around my apartment criticizing everything. He said, "So this is the special place you abandoned your family for. It's not even that big." I stood in front of him and told him to leave immediately, or I would call the police. He laughed, saying, "I wouldn't dare do that, that it would be the definitive end of my relationship with the family." I told him I didn't care. That relationship was already destroyed. Caleb pushed me, literally put his hands on my chest and pushed me, saying I was a coward, that I had always been a coward who hid behind his work and his false moral superiority. I pushed him back and told him to get out of my house. He took out his phone and started recording me, saying out loud, "Look how he assaults me, look how he attacks his own brother." It was so manipulative and pathetic that I felt like crying, not from sadness but from pure frustration that this was my brother, this person. I took the phone from his hand, deleted the video, and gave it back to him. He threatened to report me for theft and assault. I told him to do it, that I had the security cameras from my building that clearly showed he had entered without invitation after I asked him to leave. That scared him a bit, I think, because he finally left, but not without first telling me that this wasn't going to stay like this. That my mom was very sick from the stress I was causing her, and that if something happened to her, it would be my fault. That night, I sat in my empty apartment and wondered how I had gotten here. How a family that supposedly loved me had manipulated and exploited me for years to the point of physical confrontation. I felt alone, exhausted, but also strangely relieved. Like when you take off a heavy coat you've been carrying so long, you forgot what it feels like to be without it. I decided I wasn't going to tolerate any kind of toxic contact anymore. I wrote a final message to my parents, long and detailed, explaining everything from my perspective. All the years of feeling invisible and undervalued. All the times I put their needs above mine. All the ways they had systematically favored Caleb. I ended the message saying, I need space to heal and build a life that makes me happy. Please respect that. I love you, but I can't continue in this dynamic. I sent them the message and then blocked them on all possible platforms. The following days were weird. My extended family started bombarding me with messages. My Aunt Paula wrote me a long testament about family values and how I was betraying them. My Uncle Ricardo sent me voice messages yelling at me about respect and responsibility. My cousins sent me memes making fun of me, calling me selfish and dramatic. Even my grandmother, who, as I said, was usually neutral, sent me a physical letter. Yes, a paper letter, saying I was behaving like a spoiled child and needed to apologize to my family. I didn't respond to any of them. I blocked them all. It was liberating and terrifying at the same time, like I had just cut contact with literally my entire family. But it was also necessary. I knew it in my heart. I couldn't keep being the repository of all their expectations and guilt while they treated me like a second-class citizen. Then Caleb tried one last desperate move. He called my work, asked to speak to my boss, and told him I had drug addiction problems and that my erratic behavior was a concern for my family. My boss called me worried, and I had to explain the whole situation to him. The toxic relationship with my family, the months of abuse and exploitation, the continued harassment after I left. It was humiliating to have to expose my personal life like that, but my boss turned out to be incredibly understanding. He told me he had seen this type of situation before, that it was clearly a case of toxic family trying to control me, and that if I needed support from HR or even legal, the company would back me up. I thanked him. I literally almost cried on that call. It was the first time in months that someone validated me, that someone acknowledged that I wasn't the villain of this story. My boss also suggested I consider therapy to process all this, that the company had an employee assistance program that covered mental health sessions. I took his advice and started therapy the following week. Months passed. I unblocked my parents once just to see if they had tried to contact me. I had like 200 unread messages. I read them all in one sitting. It was a cyclical pattern. First, guilt messages. How could you do this to us? Then, anger. You're a terrible son. Then manipulation. Your mom is sick because of you. Then, false remorse. We just want you to come back. We miss you. And then back to guilt. Never, not once, was there a real apology. They never acknowledged the favoritism, the exploitation, or how their actions had affected me. It was all about how I had failed them. I also saw that Caleb's situation had worsened considerably. From what I could gather from the fragmented messages, my parents were struggling to keep the house because without my financial contribution they couldn't make the payments. Caleb still had no stable job, jumping from one temporary job to another. Stephanie was frustrated because she had expected living with my parents to be temporary, and they had already been there for months. The third baby was born with complications, and the medical expenses were enormous. In one particularly revealing message, my mom wrote, "If only you would come back and help, we could get ahead. Caleb is trying, but he needs support. You could make the difference." The audacity of asking me to come back to rescue them after everything that had happened was incredible. I blocked them again and decided it was the last time I would check their messages. 6 months after I left, I found out through a mutual acquaintance, someone from the neighborhood where I grew up, who I ran into by chance, that my parents had been evicted from their house. Apparently, between the mortgage, Caleb's debts, and no longer having my financial help, they couldn't keep up with the payments. The house was foreclosed. My parents moved to a small apartment, just the two of them. Caleb and Stephanie went to live with her parents, but that situation lasted only a month because Stephanie finally got fed up with all the drama and asked for a divorce. She took the kids and went to live with her sister in another state. Caleb, from what I was told, was living in a friend's basement, depressed and bitter. My mom apparently was telling everyone that I had destroyed the family, that because of my selfishness, they had lost everything. The narrative they had constructed was that I was the villain who had abandoned his family in their time of need, and they were the innocent victims of my cruelty. Part of me felt sorry when I found out about all this, but most of me felt nothing. Like, empty. Years of therapy have helped me understand that it's not my responsibility to rescue them from the consequences of their own decisions. That enabling Caleb's irresponsible behavior wasn't love, it was codependency. That allowing them to treat me like a walking ATM without emotions or needs of my own wasn't being a good son, it was being a doormat. Now I'm 26 years old. I live in an apartment I love. I have a stable job that values me, and I'm starting to rebuild my life on my own terms. I moved to a bigger place 2 months ago, a one-bedroom apartment with a view of a park. I adopted a cat, something I could never do living with my parents because my mom is allergic. I'm dating someone, an incredible girl I met at a work event and who, when I told her my story, hugged me and told me I deserved much better. Do I miss my family? Sometimes. I miss the idea of what could have been, of a family that valued and respected me, but I don't miss the reality of what they were, people who only wanted me when I was useful to them. My therapist says I'm in the grieving stage, processing the loss of a family I never really had. It's a weird concept, but it makes sense. Last week, my cousin Daniel, the same one who had told me I needed therapy at that horrible family meeting, sent me an apology message. He said that over time he had better understood the situation, that he had seen how my parents treated Caleb differently, and that he felt bad for being part of the ambush. I thanked him, but told him I needed more time before considering resuming any family relationship. He replied that he understood, and that when I was ready, he would be there. I don't know if I'll ever forgive my parents or Caleb. My therapist says forgiveness is a personal process, and I shouldn't feel pressured to do it. For now, I'm okay leaving things as they are, focusing on building a life that makes me happy, surrounding myself with people who value me for who I am and not for what I can give them. And that, after everything that happened, feels like victory enough.